Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Eden Alternative live show. I'm Jill Vitale, also with the Eden Alternative, and I'm thrilled to have Ayana King with me today. We are going to be talking about unconscious bias and how that's impacting the field of aging services, and how unconscious bias about race, age, gender, sexuality, abilities is really undermining our success and is impacting us way more than we ever knew was possible. So I'm thrilled to have Ayana here today. And when we were talking about the show, we said, and Ayana and I were talking, we're like, people will come away from the show learning things that will help them to be better leaders and better human beings. And what better opportunity than that is there? So thank you for everyone for joining us today. And Ayana, thank you for being here with us. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So Ayana, tell everyone if you would. So Ayana is the CEO of Maximum Communications, but will you talk a little bit about yourself, your organization, and I know you've got background in senior living and aging services too. So if you touch on that, that would be great.
I do. So, Ayana King, owner extraordinaire of Maximum Communications. And my business is really two-part. One part is all consulting on content strategy, social media, reputation management, PR. But the other part of my business is dedicated solely to talking about having conversations, discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And you mentioned that I spent some time in the senior living industry, and I did in communications. And that's really where a lot of my awareness about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion came from, just from that experience, which was a great experience, but could sometimes be a painful experience also. So I'm really glad to be here talking about it, and how we could just, like you said, be better leaders, and by doing that, become better human beings too.
Great, thank you. And for everybody out there watching, listening, if you're watching this live, please put in the comment box where you are joining us from. It's always great to see everyone here. And as you have thoughts or questions as we go through the show today, please put those in the comment box too. And Ayana and I can see those as we come in, and I will be answering the questions, but Ayana will. So let's get into this. Let's talk a little bit about unconscious bias. What do you mean when you talk about that unconscious bias?
That's exactly what I mean. These are thoughts. This is bias that is automatic. It's not something that's at the forefront of our brain when we're having these biases, when we're having these thoughts. And really, it is something that affects everyone. Every single one of us has some unconscious bias that impacts us at some level, and therefore has the potential to impact others.
Yeah, because even though it's unconscious, it's not harmless,
Oh,
right?
no, it's very harmful.
It
Yeah.
impacts the way we behave. You want to talk a little bit about that, would you?
Exactly. It could be very harmful because unconscious bias is really those first thoughts that we have. Again, they aren't something that we pre-thought up. They are things that happen automatically based on the experiences we've had in the past, how we were raised, the kinds of things we watch on TV, the kinds of books we read, and we form an opinion really quickly without even thinking about it about other people, other communities, other cultures based on unconscious bias. And if we don't choose a second thought, right, that first thought that is unconscious really does run rampant. And so it causes breakdown in communication. It causes unfair stereotyping. And really in the workplace, it impacts our relationships. And if we're not careful, it will impact our reputation as well. Because when you are on the receiving end of microaggressions as a result of unconscious bias, which I know we'll talk about, it impacts your reputation and it affects the person on the receiving end of that. So we have to do a lot of work to address our own unconscious bias. And first, we have to realize that we have unconscious bias.
Yes, and we all have them, right?
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
And yeah, as much as we want to think that we don't, we do. And so I think there's something about that, even just saying that, it makes it okay to examine things, right? That everybody
Definitely.
has these things, and we need to look at them, and we need to address them if we really want to drive change.
That's right.
So I'm curious, and I think you wanted to ask this too, Ayana, from the group, is people who are out there. There was a question you wanted to ask, right, about unconscious bias?
Yeah, I'm really interested. Are you talking about my question that I had for the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question to the audience was, how many people really knew what unconscious bias meant? Have they examined their own? Are they hearing a lot of these terms? Unconscious bias, microaggression, equity, when we're talking about diversity inclusion. Are they hearing these words, even leaders, for the very first time? Because my experience in the last 2 years in just hosting these kinds of discussions has been that most people are not aware of their own unconscious bias and are very, very uncomfortable talking about it. But if we are to be leaders and good leaders, not just I call myself a leader, but if we are to be good leaders, we need to examine our own unconscious bias so that we can reach everyone our company, our organization represents, everyone.
Absolutely. So we'd love to hear from people who are out there, and sometimes it takes a few minutes for the comments to come in. So for those of you who are watching live, did you know before today what unconscious bias means? And even more than that is, have you examined it?
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing
Yeah,
to talk about, it's another thing to do the work, right?
that's right. That's right.
So, well, we all, this summer, with I feel like, so I spent a lot of years in aging services organizations and running communities, and we've started to do a lot of work around the bias that we have around aging,
Mm-hmm.
right, and people living with different abilities and things like,
Yep.
and we still have a lot of work to do there. But
Yes.
I don't think this is my personal opinion, we haven't done enough really looking at the bias that exists around race and ethnicity, and so many organizations with the murder of George Floyd came out with statements, right,
Yeah.
about this is the kind of organization that we are. And the Eden Alternative, we did that as well. And then some have done more work, and then some left
Mm-hmm.
it,
Yeah.
right? Let's make a statement. So will you talk a little bit about that, what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah. That's a dangerous place to be. And the place that I'm talking about is in the place of um, unorganized messaging that is coming out with highly emotional, very charged messages about equality, specifically around Black Lives Matter, making these very forceful, in your face statements, but leaving them as a statement and not even examining how those statements impact the people you work with. Because it's easy for somebody to put up a black tile on their social media page, on their corporate page, Black Lives Matter. But do they matter? Have you talked to your staff? Um, do you consider maybe the folks that you work with? What are you doing to demonstrate that Black Lives Matter? And what happens is, well, the reason I say it's a dangerous place to be is because 2020, you will hear it again and again, is the year of accountability. And many people, many organizations are not going to simply get away with being able to do something that puts them in the limelight for a moment to show their solidarity without action, because your employees will call you back. They'll call you out. Your shareholders, your stakeholders, your clients, your customers, they will call you out. I know this because I've seen it, and we've seen it with some big brands already this year. Some large brands put out statements that, quite frankly, then they had to really answer for why, if Black Lives Matter, there was such a gap in equity.
Mm-hmm.
Their Black employees weren't considered, weren't heard. So yeah, that's my feeling around that. I tell clients, don't make a statement unless it's coming from the heart. Don't make a statement unless you are ready to back it up and you are really to put some action behind the words that you post.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's great to take a stand and make a statement, but that's not enough.
It's not enough. Where's your movement behind that stand? And I just want to say too, like I've been working with some really great clients, even clients in the senior living industry who are taking this very seriously. And I'm telling you that I am very excited about that because I know a lot of minority groups have been waiting for this, especially for the senior living, senior care industry for a long time.
Yeah.
They've been waiting to be recognized.
Yes,
and a long time.
I want to dig into that. And at first, there's a bunch of responses to the question you posed, Ayana. So Denise says, "I know what unconscious bias is, just not always aware of when they come up for me."
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Stewart has a question. Would you define unconscious bias as the same as implicit bias?
People do use them interchangeably a lot. I think that may be a matter of preference. I use unconscious bias, understanding that implicit bias also refers to bias that you have not thought out, bias that's automatic, bias that's inherent.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Jack said, "I've always confused bias with culture and innate suppositions."
Well, I guess I'd want to talk a little further about that. I don't think that bias should be confusing at all because we know what bias means.
Mm-hmm.
It means a preference toward, it means that's what it means. So when we say it's unconscious, it is your automatic response in favor of or against certain groups, usually minority groups. And by minority groups, I mean many minority groups. Sometimes that minority group may be members of the LGBTQ community, which are also almost always left out of the conversation when we're talking about senior living, senior care.
Yes, definitely. And I'm Letitia, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I've heard of it and I'm aware. Unfortunately, lots of my ex-acquaintances and friends don't want to face it. It's easier for people to act like it doesn't exist or for them to act like they don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So when people pretend not to know what you're talking about, when you clearly have laid out this action, this comment was inappropriate, it hurt my feelings, whatever the case may be, when somebody like really gaslights you is you're being too sensitive. Oh, you take everything the wrong way. That is microaggression. Microaggression is what that is. It's microinvalidation. It is a result of unconscious bias because people have these notions about you before they get to know you. Remember, we said it's inherent. Remember, we said that it's learned a lot of times. And so when you call them out about that, they don't know how to respond. So their only response is to shut it down. That's not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's how that happens.
Now, since you said the term microaggression, will you talk a little bit more about that, what that really means, or what some examples?
Yeah, so microaggressions are comments. They're usually subtle. They are usually well-meaning. They aren't typically meant to hurt you, but that's what they do. And on the flip side of that, on the receiving end, they will make a person feel as though, did I take this the wrong way?
Mm-hmm.
Am I being too sensitive? And it's because of the comments. So let me point something out. A microaggression for many minority folks working in majority culture workplaces, okay? Folks who are not used to working with, communicating with, friendships with other Black and brown people may say something like, wow, you're really articulate. They think that that is a compliment, but why would I not be articulate? Because when you say that, really what I heard you say is, Black women aren't usually articulate, so I'm surprised that you are. And so I'm going to compliment you on that. Of course, I'm articulate. I grew up here like everyone else. I speak English. I went to school. That's not a compliment. What it is a microaggression. So people may not always be able to point out a microaggression, the giver, but the receiver always knows what it is. We know what it is. And so it's important for us to talk about unconscious bias and microaggressions and the different types of microaggressions, micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidations, because this happens in our workplace. And many folks who are especially not in positions of leadership may not feel comfortable saying, hey, this was wrong, this was inappropriate, I didn't like it. So it continues to happen.
Yes.
And this is sometimes why we don't have very diverse teams, teams that really trust each other, teams that can have real conversations around race and ethnicity, around age bias and discrimination, discrimination against LGBTQ community. It's because we don't have trust with one another to even have that conversation.
Right. Absolutely. And, you know, when you were talking about the microaggressions, you know, we talk a lot about those kinds of things that happen related to age, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look so, you're 50, you don't look like you're
Yes.
50, you look like you're 40, you look great. And is that an example of an
That's a really good example.
Okay. So
that's a microinvalidation.
Okay.
Because what's wrong with you looking 50?
Right.
What's wrong with that?
That's what I say now.
And by the way, we usually don't do that to men. We usually don't do that to men. We tell men as they get older looking, they look more handsome, they look more distinguished. When women get older, we want them to look younger.
Right. Absolutely.
Microaggressions, unconscious bias.
And they might seem small, but they have a huge impact, right?
Yes. Yep.
So let's talk a little bit or a lot about this field of, and Jack Cumming followed up on his earlier comment. Many people still expect Black people to adapt to European concepts while we ought to be learning from each other and welcoming the opportunity to learn. So he said he was confused with culture. So thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
So our field, and when I look back, and if the Eden Alternative, you know, we all went through an online education program to dig into unconscious bias. And as I was taking that course, I really started seeing what I should have seen a long time ago. But seeing it even more, that when you look at communities, you have an incredible amount of diversity in people that are direct care partners, that work in dining services, that work in housekeeping. And then the further you go up the organizational chart, what happens?
Say it, Jill. Just say it. Just say it, Jill. Say it.
Whiter and whiter and whiter. And then at the top, it also often becomes white and male.
Yes.
And, you know, so it's the fact that we have not addressed this yet, and the fact that I didn't really, when I was running these communities, I kind of was like, but I never did anything about it. This is having a huge impact, right? If we look at this. So what are you seeing? What's going on here? What can we do about it?
I'm seeing exactly the same thing you're seeing. I'm seeing exactly the same thing that everyone else is saying that we don't talk about. And let me tell you what I think we do in this industry that perpetuates this is we look around, especially up at the top. We can look around and we can look at our entire teams and we can say, but they are diverse. They are diverse. We have lots of women, we have men, and we have people of color, and they stop there and they feel really good about themselves. But what it is, when you look at these different groups, and particularly people of color, where are they? Where are they? They are in hourly positions. Not only are they in hourly positions, but many of them are not even making a livable wage. And we have the nerve to celebrate diversity. The nerve. When what we don't do is give people who may be in the middle or even at the top, maybe you work in a corporate office, we don't give them the opportunity. We don't even ask them what their experience is. And so you know what they do? They leave. And then if they're really bold about it, like I was, they leave and they talk about it.
Yeah.
Because It was something that we should have been talking about then. And when I talked about it seldom, because I did not feel like I could make a difference. And quite honestly, I was worried about how I would come across with my colleagues. I was. So I talked to very few people about my concerns, and I had a lot of them. And then, some of the things that I would remember, I'll tell you that bothered me most. I remember coming home and telling my husband one day that when I would go into buildings, and I would see people who looked like me, I almost felt bad.
Why? What? Talk more about that.
Because I knew a lot of them were hourly positions. I knew a lot of them probably did not have a voice to speak up when things were going wrong or when they saw some things that just were not right. And I did not want to feel as though I had left my own community in favor of like the corporate community.
Okay.
It bothered me. It bothered me. It bothered me a lot. And I remember someone reaching out to me. It was actually a job candidate, and she reached out to me and told me how she felt she was treated in a job interview, which bothered me because I could understand how it felt to her. She felt very pushed off. She felt like someone wasn't even giving her the time of day. She was qualified. And when I tried to talk about that to someone in a position where I thought they would be able to help, it was just like, and maybe they felt the same way though. Maybe they felt I don't have the power to do anything or to say anything. So we have to create relationships within our companies, within our teams, within our organizations, where people can speak up and say, hey, this is how I see it with my eyes. Because the thing is, remember what we said, unconscious bias and how it shows up and how it happens. So think about what it would be like if you had a corporate structure where everybody was the same, right? All the decision makers, all the big decision makers, and it's unconscious bias galore, just because that's who we are. But then the people who maybe could make a difference and tell you how they see things don't have the power to speak up, feel like they don't have the power to speak up.
Right.
It's ugly. Right. It's ugly. And I think this industry is in trouble. And I especially think this industry will be in trouble if people begin to get, maybe the type of compensation that they want elsewhere. They'll leave this industry. They'll leave it.
Yeah.
They will leave it.
I one of the things that you shared, and I know you're going to talk a little bit about, is looking at that this stuff is uncomfortable and it's painful. And
it is.
One of the things that when I was going through this educational process, and I've only shared this with a few with the Eden Alternative team and with you, Ayana, just because it's still like something I'm grappling with and trying to figure out, is the other thing that I really realized is something else you said, is that and again, unconscious bias is I looked at the individuals that worked in the community as, if you are a person of color, you are an hourly person and you're a care partner. And I was shared with you that there were some unbelievable women of color who worked in the community. And it hurt when I realized that I had celebrated the fact that they were in their jobs for 20 years, 30 years, and I never went and talked to them. I mean, I knew them as people, but I never thought, and maybe they would have wanted to stay in those jobs, right? Because it's an incredibly wonderful job.
Absolutely.
Celebrating the fact that people spent 30 years in this job and having to work multiple jobs to pay bills, and never once thought to say, is there something else that you want to do? Let's talk about your other skills and leadership, and what are there other things you want to do here? And that was it. It's not a fun thing to realize when you have that stuff in your head that you never saw.
Yeah. But how freeing is that to see it
Yeah.
and understand it, because you won't go back to that.
Well, that's true.
You
That's
won't ever
true.
do that again.
That's
You
true.
won't do that again. The other thing too is when we're thinking about unconscious bias and how it shows up in their workplace, and you're thinking about your care partners, but even before they get to be care partners, I think about all those resumes that end up on someone's desk, and unconscious bias shows up with that resume. So maybe when I see a name like Tamika or Keisha, just not majority culture names, maybe I may think to myself, oh, right away, this is not a good candidate, not a good
Mm.
fit here. That's the truth. We don't like to talk about it, but that's the truth. Look at a name, look at an address, and say to yourself, they might be taking the bus here. They'll probably be late.
Wow.
That's what happens. That is what happens. That is what we as an industry do more than we like to admit. And so when we look around at our teams and we see that there's not diversity there, we have to look at where our responsibility is in that. It
So
is
what
not
is
enough
so
to
how do
say,
so how do so what do how do you overcome that?
well, I think you have to have a good hiring strategy and a good talent strategy. And I think you need to be aware of diversity and inclusion. What is equity? Are we addressing our unconscious bias? How do we get past some of these unconscious bias so that we can be fair? So at the very root of it is a desire to want change. If you look around and you don't mind that there's no diversity, or if your diversity is confined to certain groups and certain job tiers, then you probably won't do anything at all. You'll be just fine. But if you are a leader who is saying to yourself, yes, I'm noticing some things for the first time and
Mhm.
I don't like how it looks, explore that. Explore that. And what I will say is your first step should not be, let me do a Google search for a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, so that we can hire somebody on to help us with this. That shouldn't be your first step. Your first step should be looking at yourself. Your first step should be, what is my responsibility as a leader in this organization? What am I doing? Do I understand what I need to understand? And if you don't, then you reach out to that consultant, but
Mhm.
not for your whole team. Reach out for you. Reach out for you and your core executives, because if it does not come from the top in the most genuine way, in a way that really says, I want to celebrate diversity, I want to understand inclusion, my goal is equity, then it won't be done. And
So
really
it
what you'll be
shouldn't.
doing is training people to leave you, is what you'll be training them to do.
Yeah, yeah. And so it shouldn't be a, hey, human resources person, go take care of this and figure it out, right? So if they're a board of directors, the executive leadership team, it has to start there. Is that?
Yeah, and definitely bring your HR folks on. Do you know how many people are in HR director roles who have never even explored diversity and inclusion? They think it's the same thing. They think diversity and inclusion are the same thing. So when they look at their company and they see diversity, they think they also have inclusion, and
Mm.
they think they're doing it right, and they're doing it super wrong.
So talk about that a little bit, the difference between those two concepts.
So they are not the same thing at all. So diversity is representation. It's many voices, it's many experiences. That's what diversity is. You can look around and see diversity. Sometimes you can't see diversity because you can have diversity within groups, right? Um, there's lots of different types of diversity. You mentioned abilities. We don't talk about that, but we should. We talked
Mhm.
about the LGBTQ community, gender, and of course, race and ethnicity. But there's lots of diversity of thought, socioeconomic status. There's all these different types of diversity. But inclusion is now all of these diverse folks, all of this diverse community. I want everyone who's represented to feel included and have a voice. That is the difference. So I tell people all the time in my workshops that I'm a foodie. And so what I do is I tell them, like, for me, diversity is the dinner invite. Come on over. Come on over. Come over. Inclusion is sit down at the table and have a meal with me. So what do I care if you invited me over to your house, if when it's time to eat, you leave me over in the corner?
Right, right,
A lot of
right.
folks are being left in the corner, and we are celebrating diversity, and it's gross. It's not the same.
That is such an important distinction because
Oh yeah.
you really do hear them use like they're the same thing, and they're not.
And they're not. They use them interchangeably. They're not the same thing.
So it's not just about diversity, inclusion, which ties in. So for those of you who are watching, very familiar with the Eden Alternative and like the Eden Alternative domains of well-being, it's belonging, right? And it's having your identity. You are known for your identity. It's having really, if you start to look at the Eden Alternative domains of well-being, when you start to really work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you strengthen all those things that we all need individually.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned equity for a second. We talk about equity far less, but I will tell you that equity should be the goal, because equity is freedom from bias. Equity means now that we have this diversity, now that we have this inclusive culture, everybody has the same opportunity. There's not going to be like this huge gap between men and women, between gender, between race and ethnicity. And I'm telling you, I have experienced this. There's a gap. There's a gap. But I'll also say this. In my own experience, what really worked really well for me is that I started in a community and I fell in love with this industry. And I had a manager who noticed me. She just did. And she knew that I wanted to do something different. I would have left that company had it not been for her really encouraging me to keep on, because I knew I wanted to stay in the industry. I just didn't know that I wanted to stay there. But it was because she encouraged me, and she did some things that helped me move up in the company. And I truly did move up very quickly. I don't have some of the industry experience, the longevity that other people do. But my experience that I did have there has been invaluable for me. And so now I get to share that with other people. And many of them say that it has been invaluable for them too.
Oh, absolutely. So I also wanted to just, and I think you touched on this a little bit too, but we all have unconscious bias. And then there's systemic bias, right? And institutional bias.
Yeah.
Where did those things show up in aging services organizations?
Well, I think, again, I think the reason we have the problem that we have is because it's twofold. You have the unconscious bias going on as a result of systemic ongoing bias and inequality. So some people may say to themselves, this is leaders, okay? Some leaders may say things like, well, Black people sure have come a long way, and they feel good about that. Just that we are able to work with them. And I'm telling you this because someone sent me something anonymous not too long ago, and I was shaking my head, but at the same time, I was like, yeah, that sounds right. He's only saying what a lot of people are thinking, and he feels entitled to say it. So the two show up together. They show up together. When you see unconscious bias, you've also seen the systematic oppression that picks up a resume and says, Tamika Watkins is probably not a good candidate, but Mary Harris might be.
Okay. And then so there are things you can also do with systems to get rid of some of that, right? And you had mentioned doing blind resume reviews.
Yeah, blind resume reviews is a really good way. Take off the name, take off the address, look at the skills first. I'm a LinkedIn lover. I love connecting on that platform. And a lot of people purposely leave their profile pictures off. And other people in the who use LinkedIn often will get really irritated by that. Like, you didn't even bother to put your profile picture on. No, they didn't do it for the sheer fact that some people, not all people, but some people are systematic in that. It's because they want you to see their skill set first. They want you to see their skill set first. So yeah, the other thing you can do, I think we have gotten really used to saying as an industry, fill in the blank, XY group doesn't really care to live in senior living. because they like to take care of their own, or it's just not comfortable for them. And as an industry as a whole, like, we've just got used to saying that, and we don't consider, no, maybe we show them that it's not the place for them. Maybe we do that. So even addressing some of that, you know, we can't find talent. Young Black and brown folks don't want to work in this industry other than to be CNAs. That's what they like to do. These are caregivers. Sure. Some of that is true. But have you gone out of your way to partner with HBCUs? Have you partnered with Latinx communities so that you can find, you know, talent that wants to advance, that want leadership roles? Probably not, because we just get used to saying, oh, you know, they just aren't interested.
Yes, right. And it's a cultural thing to want to take care of older people. That, you know, that was probably something I had in my head. You had said, I think it was when you were on Steve Moran's show, that, you know, when people say we don't have, well, there's no market, there's no talent that's applying for these jobs. And you said something that really stuck with me, that the talent's there. You have talent in your organization.
Yep.
Are you working to help people reach what goals they want to reach?
That's right. Have you asked them? Have you asked them what they want to do? Or have you determined for them that that's the best housekeeper you've ever had? I'm going to keep her there.
Yep.
That's the best care partner we've ever had. She's been with us 12 years. We're going to keep her there. That's the best life enrichment assistant we ever had. We're going to keep her there.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I am fortunate that I had a manager who that wasn't what she saw in me. She said, if I don't help her advance, she's going to leave our company. And I would have. And I would have. So, you know, what are we doing? We have talent. You know, we work with people that we don't even know. We do. Some of us as leaders, we don't know the people on our teams other than to see their faces on Zoom or when we go and visit their communities every other month. And that's all we know about them, because we haven't taken the time to get to know them, to figure out how we could cultivate our talent.
Right. Absolutely. And Jack asked the question, how many senior living communities have a Black marketing director? If a Black person looks at your brochure, do they see anyone that looks like them?
So let me tell you, Jack, I love interacting with you because you ask the questions and you say the stuff, Jack. I like it. So let me tell you that I worked as part of a marketing team, and I remember saying to just a couple of my colleagues who I'm still friends with, who I felt comfortable with, I remember pointing out, like, you know, it looks like we don't want Black people to live here, except for when we are marketing to this certain community, this certain region. And I brought it up twice, and that's the only time I brought it up, and I was done with it, just because, I did not feel comfortable. But that is exactly right, Jack. So I always tell people in my workshop, like, a picture is worth, and people will say 1,000 words, but that is not true. The saying is actually, a picture is worth 10,000 words. And we show people in our brochures who we are looking for. We do. We are looking for active white folks. That's who we're looking for. That's what we're looking for.
Right.
We're looking for stylish, active white folks.
Not people in wheelchairs and
Nope. And when you see people of color, and I want everybody to go back and look, I'm serious. When we see people of color in a lot of brochures for senior living, they are the same stock images. They are the same 3 couples that have been in rotation since at least 2014. So what that tells me is that, like, either they're not there, which I don't believe, or we don't even take the time to find either people in our own community that represent our communities, because that's okay. Even if your community isn't as diverse as you want it to be. If we have people of color who are living in our communities, who call our communities home, let them speak for you.
Yes.
Let them speak for you. Show who they are. Because I'll tell you, like, my dad is in his 70s. He knows when he's seeing some stock images because he's been around and now he sees the same couples, you know?
Yep. Yep.
So we say a lot in our marketing. And I do know some Black and brown women in marketing roles, and we have talked about it. And I will say that many of them felt the same way that I did. When you have diversity but not inclusion and there's no trust there, many of them didn't speak up either. Many of them didn't speak up either.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you, that's why I think this work is so important for me now too, because I get to speak on behalf of people who I know won't speak up, because I'm my own boss now.
Yes.
And I get to tell the truth, and there's something very freeing in being able to tell the truth. And people who are willing to receive the truth and to do something about it, partnering with you. It's a really good feeling.
You know, the other thing that occurred to me, we had a gentleman named Andre Stevens come on. He's from one of our registry communities in Arkansas, and he came on our show and we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And one of the things he said, and it never occurred to me, is he, you know, that down in the South, right? And he started touring around before his community opened and toured all these other communities, competition. And he said the artwork in all these Southern communities was plantation homes.
Named after plantations.
Yeah, well, yeah. And he was like, how am I ever going to feel comfortable? Why would I ever want to move into a place like this? And it's just, yeah.
Astounding.
It is astounding.
Yes. So again, a picture is worth 10,000 words, and it is our actions, not our words, that really tell on us. So if I walk into a community as a Black man in my 70s, in my 80s, knowing the environment that I grew up in, the climate of our country that I grew up in, and I show up and you have art that celebrates slavery. That's what it is. That celebrates it. You love to fly that Confederate flag. Celebrate it. You're telling me something, and I see you, and I hear you. So we're telling on ourselves. We're telling on ourselves from the top. From the top, we're telling on ourselves.
And if you don't have diversity and inclusion in your leadership team and in your organization, true inclusion, then you're never going to see those things, and you're never going to start seeing through the lens of your own experience, right?
That's right.
The more we have that, and I need to stop myself from just saying diversity, the more we have, well, diversity of voices, right? And influence.
Representation. The more representation that we have, the better our teams will be, because we also know studies show that diverse teams, they earn more. They earn more. And why do they earn more? Because you have different people coming together with different experiences. And now we're innovating together. And I can reach markets that you didn't even think about reaching, because you don't know my culture and I don't know yours. And so here we are innovating together. The reason we don't do that is because in order to do that, we have to be able to, at the top, again, look at ourselves. And sometimes ego won't allow us to do that. Anger. People feel like equality is somehow taking away from their status. All of those things keep us at a disadvantage in this industry. And again, I'm telling you, this next generation is more diverse than the one before it. These baby boomers have diverse families, and you know, they are multicultural. They have different political beliefs in the same home. And they want to live somewhere that reflects that community. So when we don't give it to them, they are going to stay home, and home care is going to continue to grow, and you're going to see communities closing. That's what's going to happen if we don't understand the seniors that we will be serving in the next 10 years. 10 years. Well,
and the people now who don't feel comfortable moving in,
That's
LGBT
right.
elders, and
That's right.
you know, there's been there is progress, and there's a lot of great organizations that have done a lot, but
absolutely,
but it's not everywhere that somebody
no.
would feel comfortable being honored, accepted. This is a place where I am honored for who I am and embraced, not despite who I am, but because
exactly. Yeah.
So lots of work to be done there for sure.
I'm encouraged though by the work that I see.
Tell us how
starting
when you're doing this work, and if you can share any stories, I don't know if you can, but how do you work with organizations?
So the first way I usually end up coming in as a consultant is typically people will hire me for a series of workshops. Now I call them workshops and not trainings, because when I come to talk to a group about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when I think of training, I think of I'm getting this knowledge, I have this knowledge, now I'm done. That's not how it is with DEI work at all. It is ongoing. It is a part of your culture. So you're always learning it. So typically, I'm coming in because I'm doing a series of workshops. And in those workshops, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the differences, just like we did here today. We talk in depth about unconscious bias and microaggressions. We talk about empathy and allyship, because I fully believe that when you find those people who are naturally empathetic in your organization, you've almost always found allies too. You just don't know it, and they need to feel empowered. And then we talk about the bottom line, how it all comes together, and what happens when we don't get this right. And I use some real life examples of people doing it all wrong. And then so that's usually how we work together.
And then what the impact, I mean, it's the right thing to do, and it's the best business decision too, right?
Yes.
You're talking about people wanting to live there and want to work in a community.
Yes.
All of these things.
So there's studies right now too that say that the new folks who are looking for jobs are actually looking to work with people who have a mission for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like that is something that's important to them. Those folks are being sought after. So like if you have a statement, but then somebody can go to your website, can go to your social media pages, and they can see that that statement is lived out. Maybe you don't have a diverse team right now, but you are showing that you're doing the work. You're partnering with other organizations so that you can create those relationships. People are looking for that. And I just want to tell you that. So I work with folks exclusively. I don't mention who I'm working with until they mention it. And I worked with a company recently who just wrote me such a great recommendation. But what stood out to me, this CEO, now this is a young white guy. It's actually two young white guys, but this one guy, and they were just so delightful to work with and made me feel like faith and humanity restored, because I'm going strictly to animals from now on. Like, this is who I love. But what he said, just very casually in conversation, because that's what it is. We're doing a lot of discussion. He said, you know how other companies go after innovation and they want the best of everything? And I said, yeah. He said, I want my company to go after being anti-racist in that way. And when he said that, I was just like, oh, this is what I have been waiting for.
Yes.
Like, this is the work that I should be doing. And it helps me to see and understand that it's important to other people too. It really is.
Yes.
It really is.
And you know, if you think about, and one thing we should mention is, if you want to look at your own implicit bias around race, age, sexuality, religion, all these different things, there is actually at Harvard University, and I think one of our teachers is going to pop the link in the box.
Yep. Implicit bias. Project Implicit.
Project Implicit, and you can take a bunch of different tests. And it was really, when you're talking about younger people and what they want, when I did this test about age, I found I had a strong preference for older people instead of younger people, which is probably just because I've just been doing all this work around honoring aging. But then I realized, you know what? I'm not seeing the younger generation. I'm not valuing them and exactly some of the things you were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's not good to have that way either. And
yep.
So it's kind of interesting. And Ashton had a comment that it is critically important to avoid the trap of zero-sum thinking, that if we address racism, we're not addressing ageism, et cetera, et cetera. It's all one struggle. Working against any form of prejudice makes life better for older people, just as working toward a better world in which to grow old benefits everyone lucky enough to do so.
First of all, thank you, Ashton Applewhite. And I am standing right now because Ashton Applewhite, wow, yes, to have you on and just to say that, yes. So why can't we do all of these things? Of course we can. Of course we can. Of course we can fight ageism, fight racism. We can fight discrimination. We can fight misogyny. We don't have to like pick off these little sections of the bush and deal with this first. If we deal with one of them, we can deal with all of them together. So yeah, thank you.
So you help organizations work on all of these things, right? Because it's really about figuring out your unconscious bias and addressing it.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So we talk about all of it. I just think more recently, especially in the last several months, obviously, like people have really been reaching out to learn how to have discussions about race and ethnicity. People just don't know how to do it. And what I find is that for leaders, they really most of the time just need permission to not have all the answers. Mm-hmm. We expect leaders to have all the answers. When they don't have the answers, they're often criticized. But on this issue, on this matter, it's perfectly fine not to have the answers. What you're trying to do is learn who you are so that you can learn about others. And in doing that, we really do create the kinds of communities that we say we want.
Absolutely. And true communities, not just a sign outside that says
that's right.
Right?
That's right.
So for people who are out there watching, this is a great opportunity to ask some questions. We have a few more minutes left. So if you have questions for Ayana, that would be awesome. And in the meantime, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that's a big passion, a big focus of the Eden Alternative is really engaging older people, residents, elders, whatever however you refer to the people that live in your community, to be part of the solution. And when you said, leadership can't have all the answers, it's foolish to think that you can.
Yeah.
And like at my old community, we did a lot of work around ageism and ableism, with it, just bringing up the topic and talking about it. And the people that lived in the community were the ones who drove all the change.
That's right.
So do you do this? Have you worked with organizations where you do this kind of workshop with the people that live there or that they serve?
They're usually hosting their own meetings, resident meetings or town halls. I think some communities are still figuring out how to do that. But to be honest, I don't recommend that communities do that at all until they've examined where they're at. Because how am I going to lead this charge and rally the troops in my community when I don't know how I feel about it?
That's a very good point.
So I always say, part of being a good ally, and we hear about allies often too, is really doing my own work. It is great to be out in the streets marching. I think that is valid. I think that it's important. I don't shake my head at that in disapproval, but I think it is just as important for you to figure out your own stuff.
Yes.
And then before you head out to the streets, head into your living room, talk to your own family. Thanksgiving is coming up. Maybe we should be having some hard conversations with the people we love, because, part of the issue is that we have to address how we are, who we are. And that's very difficult for people to do. But again, if you're a leader, that's what we have to do. It's always starting with me examining myself first. Before I think this is why we get into so much trouble, because we say we got to do this and then we hand it down, but we're never really invested in it ourselves.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. And that's what we talk about with the Eden Alternative, is when you're working toward transforming your organization, you grow first. Leaders
That's
have
right.
got to grow.
That's right.
And so Jack asked a question, can you tell us about the Free People of North Carolina and their history?
I can't tell you a lot about the free. I'm not. I'll be totally honest. I'm not a history buff. I think you asked this question before too. So I feel that you want to tell us something about it. So maybe tell me what you're thinking about.
So Jack, maybe put that in the comment.
Yeah, because I feel like you asked about this before. My husband is the history buff. I read a lot, but I don't know of every of every travesty that's ever happened. I don't. Somebody else asked me about something very recent that happened, like a shooting or something. Had I read about it, and was like almost like taken aback when I was like, no, I didn't read about it. But I'm telling you, I purposely do not read all of it because it's traumatic, doggone it.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Well, so,
it is.
So for people, so, you know, I think if people contacted you, that would be a very good idea, because you're awesome and you do great work.
Thank you, Jill.
And you also said, don't contact me until you do some of your own figuring things out. So do you have recommendations?
Yes.
And if you don't have them off the top of your head, we can put it in the comments after the show. But websites, TED Talks, books, do you have anything you would recommend?
So Amazon came up with a whole list of books. And one of the books that I just wrapped reading, which was called Bias. It's got a subtitle under it, but it's Jennifer Eberhardt. That was a very good book. I will also say there's a podcast, the 1619 Project, just launched. There are a lot of resources out there. I give resources when I do my workshop. Oftentimes I talk about some books. But I will say on this live stream, like I have to so many other people, go find out. Go find out. Because you know what? When you want a squash recipe, you know what you do? You go find a squash recipe. You go and find that, don't you? Yes, you do. When you want to learn how to make homemade soap, guess what you do? Go and find out, don't you? So if you want to learn about how you can be a better person, how you can learn about the experiences of Black and brown people, of the LGBTQ community, of people with disabilities, of people who are dealing with age bias and discrimination, go find out, because the internet has a plethora of resources for you. And so go find out. Go find out. Don't make somebody else your teacher. Especially don't hear me. Don't. This happens. People hop in that inbox and want a bunch of free information and they never get it from me. I'm just telling you that. I will send you in the right direction.
All right. Well, Kathy Hagen put some of the a book that she really liked in the chat box.
What is it? Let's see. Yes, that's the one that I'm talking about. That's the one that I'm talking about.
Okay. Gosh, thank you so much. I could keep talking to you for hours, and really appreciate you being with us today, sharing your insight about unconscious bias and how it's impacting things and what we can do about it. And so your website is listed here at the bottom of the screen, getmaxcoms.com. So reach out to Ayana if you want to talk with her about partnering on diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or you do social media, public relations, marketing.
All kinds of content coaching for marketing. So those marketing folks who are trying to figure out how can we be more inclusive, let's chat.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jill.
We appreciate you so much. And thanks to everybody for watching and being part of the show through your comments and questions.